AMD just dropped their new Radeon 9000 series cards, and I'm really impressed by what I'm seeing here with the Radeon RX 9070 XT and the non-XT variant of the 9070. From 1440 all the way up to 4K, both of these cards are offering outstanding performance, and I think a lot of people out there are going to want to get their hands on them. In this video, we're going to be testing out the all-new AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT. I've also got the RX 9070 non-XT variant, and for a couple of these tests, we'll throw the RTX 5070 into the mix just to see how everything stacks up against each other. It's no secret that AMD recently announced these cards, and what I've got here is the ASUS Prime overclock edition of the RX 9070 XT and the overclock edition of the 9070 non-XT variant. I do have more videos planned. There are a couple builds that I want to do with both of these cards. We're going to go small form factor with some of them, but in this video, we're mainly going to be focusing on the RX 9070 XT. I think that's the one that a lot of people are going to want to get their hands on. Taking a look at the ASUS Prime version, it is a 2.5 slot card and it requires 3 8-pin power connectors. Overall, I've always loved the aesthetic of these ASUS Prime cards. There's no RGB here, and that's something I've been trying to get rid of on a lot of my PCs, but usually nowadays it's actually a bit cheaper to go with RGB on some of the parts. So I'm glad to see that they didn't add any here. Very clean aesthetic, minimalistic, and I think this can go inside of an all-white chassis or a black chassis and look just fine. Full metal vented backplate, plus we've got a dual BIOS, performance mode or quiet mode. You can swap this out with the switch at any time. Dual ball bearing triple fans, and these are ASUS's new Axial Tech fans, so they've got the longer blades here. And it's got a 0 dB mode, so under light use or just idling, these fans will completely turn off. And just to give you a look here, the biggest difference between the ASUS Prime RX 9070 XT and the non-XT variant are the connectors. Obviously, we've got a higher TGP on the XT model. It's going to pull more wattage, up to 304 watts with no overclock, and it requires 3 8-pin connectors as opposed to the 9070 that only requires 2 8-pin connectors. The cards are the same length. They're 2.5 slot, and to tell you the truth, I kind of wish the non-XT variant was just a bit shorter than the XT. And of course, when it comes to the overall specs of the XT version, we've got 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 running at a 256-bit bus, 64 megabytes of AMD Infinity Cache, 64 compute units, 4,096 stream processors. Total board power is 304 watts without an overclock, and they do recommend at least a 650 watt power supply. In order to get all of the testing done with this card and the others, they're all going to be inside of the same rig. What I've got here is an i7-14700K 360mm AIO, 32 gigs of Viper RAM running at 7400 MHz, and for the power supply, I've got an ASUS Prime 850 watt. And again, keep an eye on the channel because I've got a couple more videos coming up. I want to do a small form factor build with the XT or the non-XT. Let me know what you'd like to see in the comments below. But we're probably going to end up pairing this thing up with the AMD Ryzen 9800 X3D. First thing I want to do here is jump into some real-world gameplay with the XT. Then we're going to move over to some benchmarks and compare this to the non-XT variant and even the RTX 5070. Here we have Cyberpunk 2077 4K using the Ultra preset, and with some upcoming benchmarks, we're going to go native 4K, but a lot of people are going to run it out of the box at a preset, so I wanted to show you how it runs. We're seeing an average of 75 FPS with Cyberpunk 2077 4K Ultra preset. This is some great performance at 4K. I mean, it's actually performing way better than I thought it would. And you could definitely get more out of it using frame gen if that's what you want to do. But overall, by itself like this, it's looking amazing. I also wanted to run some 3D Mark benchmarks on the XT and the non-XT. Steel Nomad on the XT, we got a total score of 7,079. Around 70 FPS, and on the non-XT variant, total score of 5,795, average of 57 FPS, getting close to 58, and again, these are in the same exact system, 14700K. Next one we have here is Port Royal. On the XT, total score of 18,357, FPS of 84, looks great here, and that 9070 isn't that far behind. Total score of 15,279 with an average of 70 FPS. And the final one we have here is Time Spy, and both of these scores are looking really good. Over on the XT, our graphics score was 29,984. On the non-XT, 25,571. Next up, we've got some in-game benchmarks, and I wanted to throw the RTX 5070 into the mix. Cyberpunk 4K Native Ultra. As you can see, that RTX 5070 even came behind the non-XT variant, and with the XT, we had an average of 61. Taking it down to 1440p, now our average jumped way up on the XT version, and the 5070 is still falling behind the non-XT. Moving over to Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, 4K native, very high. XT had an average of 72 FPS, and the non-XT did fall behind the 5070 in this test at 4K and even 1440. But the XT is still holding strong here, up to an average of 134 FPS. And the final one I tested was Black Myth Wukong, 4K native cinematic. If you've ever tried to run this at cinematic on any system, you know how hardcore it is. The XT managed 30 FPS, the non-XT 24, and you can see that the RTX 5070 came in at 13 FPS, and this really comes down to the VRAM amount. We've got 16 gigs of VRAM with both of the 9070s, and only 12 gigs with the 5070. And with Wukong set at that cinematic preset, it is running out of VRAM. 1440, same settings here. On the XT, we had an average of 50. Non-XT 41, and on the 5070 we were up to 29 FPS. Now it's time to get back into some more real-world gaming with the XT, and right now we've got Spiderman 2 4K very high. No ray tracing, we're not using FSR, we're not using frame generation or anything like that. This is native 4K at the highest settings minus ray tracing. Now one thing I didn't have access to because it's not in the games yet is FSR 4. But AMD does claim that there'll be a bunch of games day one once this launches with FSR 4 support. So I will make another video checking that out. I'm really interested to see what that can do and how it looks. Here's Forza Horizon 5 4K Extreme Plus, and for Extreme Plus, I mean, when you go to the Extreme preset, there's actually some settings that still can go up a bit, like ray tracing. We're totally maxed out here at 4K. Getting an average of 141 FPS. Here's Marvel Rivals 4K Ultra preset, and I thought we'd see a little more out of this, but that's kind of how it goes with this game right now. It's still early access. Every time I test it on a higher end card, I kind of expect more out of it. But right now, we're seeing an average of around 68 FPS. To tell you the truth, with most of these esports games, 1440 is going to be more than enough. And at 1440, with these same settings, we're getting an average of 93. Doom Eternal 4K Ultra Nightmare ray tracing off. And AMD claims that with ray tracing on, you can see an average of 144 FPS, and it's totally possible with ray tracing, but I left it off here. And by the end, I had an average of 211 FPS. The final game we have here is Monster Hunter Wilds 4K Ultra preset. And keep in mind with that Ultra preset, FSR is set to Ultra quality, so we are using a little here, and we still get those dips under 60. But one big thing to keep in mind is at the time of making this video, this game is not very well optimized yet, and we're still waiting on patches from the developers. So it's only been out for about a week at the time of making this video. So definitely keep that in mind. I got a feeling, you know, once we get some more performance patches for this game, we're going to see better performance at this Ultra preset. But I figured I'd go ahead and take it down to the high preset. And at that 4K high preset, we're now over 60, seeing an average of 74 FPS with it. So yeah, not too bad for 4K. And a lot of people are going to be just fine playing this at 1440p, but I really wanted to kind of stress the XT out.
Don't mind if I do.
Last thing I wanted to talk about here were thermals, and with the Prime variant, this is actually using a phase change GPU thermal pad. It just creates a nice even layer between the GPU die and the cooler itself. Plus, you don't have to worry about squeeze out, and this thing isn't going to dry out as fast as thermal compound would. And with the newly designed Prime cards from ASUS, I haven't worried about thermals with any of these cards so far, and this one's no different. In the case I'm using, side panel on, average 4K gaming, 49 degrees Celsius, and the maximum temp this hit was only 66 while running benchmarks. Average 4K gaming, 46 degrees Celsius, and the maximum this ever hit was 55 degrees Celsius. The triple fans, paired up with the cooler they design and that phase change thermal pad, really do a great job on this Prime card. Overall, really impressed with the performance the 9070 XT is putting out, and in my next video, we will explore some overclocking or maybe even just, some power limit tweaking. Just by taking that up a bit, we can reach some pretty high clocks on this card. It's actually really impressive. And with what we have here, I think a lot of people out there are going to want to jump on board with the 9070 XT given the state of GPUs right now. And it's really going to come down to pricing, and unfortunately at the time of making this video, since this is the Prime Overclock Edition, I don't have the price on this thing. But keep in mind, it's the overclock version, which do tend to run a bit more than MSRP cards. AMD has set the MSRP of the XT at $599, so overclock cards do run a bit higher. Definitely keep that in mind. But again, I'll leave the price and a link where you can buy it in the description as soon as it's available. But until then, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Is the AMD RX 9070 XT offering enough performance for you to consider picking one of these up? Are you going to skip it all together, keep what you have now, wait for next gen? Let me know down below. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. And like always, thanks for watching.